Yannick Ngakoue is going to be a huge boost for this Chicago Bears defensive line, but he could also mean the end of Trevis Gipson in Chicago.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. You can also join the Locked On Bears subtext group at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBears for even more in-depth exclusive Bears news and analysis, including a Yannick Ngakoue All-22 film breakdown, some other All-22 film stuff, data and charting and more. Join subtext.com/LockedOnBears. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or enter our promo code LockedOnNFL for a white tech hat with any order. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you. On the show today, we break down what Yannick Ngakoue's addition means for the likes of Trevis Gipson, who may find himself as the odd man out on this Chicago Bears defensive line. We'll also check in on Ngakoue's run defense and where maybe some of the concerns are overblown and maybe where some of the concerns are still valid. And we'll wrap up talking about the new tight end, Marcedes Lewis, coming to Chicago for his 18th NFL season after the last handful of seasons with the Green Bay Packers, and we'll look at how he fits into that group up front. But I want to start with the ripple effect of Ngakoue, not in terms of the on-field impact, which we talked about a lot on Friday's podcast right after the signing. So I encourage you to go back and listen to that if you have not yet, but particularly on this Bears depth chart and on the rest of the defensive line. Because sure, you add Ngakoue and you might think, all right, he goes to the top of the depth chart, bumps everybody down a notch, and then, whoever was going to be the sixth man on the defensive end group before is now seventh, and now maybe that bottom of the roster guy was going to make the team, but now he's not because I'm getting ahead of myself, because Ngakoue is kind of at the top and pushes everybody back down another one. But based on kind of what we know about Ryan Poles, what we've seen coming out of training camp, and just sort of the general, just the sort of like feeling and speculation and rumors around the team, it's starting to look like Trevis Gipson may ultimately end up being more of the odd man out at that defensive end spot. When you look at the depth chart, right, we're going to have Walker and Ngakoue. We've heard the Bears say Ngakoue is going to be an every down player for them, a starter, and we expect DeMarcus Walker to at least start at defensive end in base packages and perhaps kick inside to defensive tackle sometimes, but primarily be that starting defensive end. And we thought, okay, well, maybe that just makes Trevis Gipson your number 3 defensive end, because we were thinking he might start on the outside with Walker, but instead he could be the number 3. And then you've got Rasheem Green, who they signed as a free agent this year, and Dominique Robinson, the draft pick from a couple of years ago, or I guess from last year, that can rotate in as backups there. But ultimately, like, Gipson might still be that first guy off the bench. But it might not be that simple. I mean, when you think about Gipson, like, yes, he was a starter last season. Well, he didn't actually start week 1, you might remember. He didn't really become a starter until week 8 against the Dallas Cowboys after they traded Robert Quinn. Your starting defensive ends last year were Robert Quinn and Al-Qadim Muhammad for the majority, at least the first half of that season, before they started really changing things up that way. So it's not like Gipson comes in as this super experienced starter. He certainly has played, 2 full seasons of, NFL snaps. He's played over 1,000 snaps in the league. Not that he doesn't have experience, but, this is not like the quote unquote incumbent starter who then sort of, as a result, you feel like he's kind of guaranteed some kind of starting or some kind of certain amount of playing time and roster capacity. Like with Ngakoue back in here, it's a competition between everybody to be the backups for Ngakoue and Walker. And Gipson, despite how much he's played, isn't owed anything in that regard. And I think we need to keep in mind, first and foremost, he was not a Ryan Poles draft pick. He was a Ryan Pace draft pick. He was also a 5th round pick. That also plays a role in here. Not that the Bears are going to say, well, he's a 5th rounder, so cut him compared to somebody else only because he's a 5th rounder. But more so to say that, like, the expectations are different for a 5th round pick than a 1st or a 2nd or a 3rd round pick comparatively, right? You're going to have a little bit of a longer leash, a little bit more patience, a little bit more willingness to develop an earlier draft pick compared to a later draft pick organizationally. And certainly, like, his draft status is not going to be what decides whether he makes this team or not. It's going to be how well he practices and how well he shows out this preseason and throughout training camp. But given the lack of ties to Ryan Poles, and also I think the encouraging things we've seen from the other defensive ends on this depth chart, he may ultimately end up being the odd man out. Because when you think about it, it's Walker, it's Ngakoue. Rasheem Green was just signed this year on a 1-year deal. I mean, unless he is just terrible throughout the training camp at the preseason, he's going to be good to go. Dominique Robinson was a Ryan Poles draft pick, albeit a 5th round pick. And not that his draft status is something that's going to really lock him into a bunch of spots, but like, it's only his 2nd year, and they drafted him as a developmental player at defensive end. They're going to be patient with him. So those 4 guys are pretty well locked in. And now at training camp, Terrell Lewis has really been one of the more consistent standouts on the roster, let alone at the defensive end position specifically. And he's a guy who the Bears brought in during last season. He's a practice squad guy. I think he might have got called up later in the year there. He's been around the league for a few seasons as well. He's played some snaps over the last 3 seasons for the Los Angeles Rams, started a few games in there. By no means is he a guy that you think of as a starter or like a starting caliber player, but a guy with some upside that has been standing out more so at training camp than the likes of Trevis Gipson. And Gibson's coming off of a down year. He had his sort of like mini, almost breakout type season 2 years ago, 2021, 7 sacks when he had Khalil Mack and Robert Quinn and Akeem Hicks on that defensive line, and he got a bunch of one-on-ones and could win, but his sacks go down, his pass rush win rate goes down. I think last season he was outside of the top 100 in pass rush win rate. I think 2 years ago even he was only like 64, outside of the top 64. So like, as much as we want Gibson to be successful and we're encouraged by the progress he was making, he didn't get better last season. And he's not really owed much. He's not Ryan Poles' guy. And that starts to become the formula for a guy that they could end up being a kind of what might seem like a surprise training camp cut. When a week ago or 2 weeks ago or a month ago, we were thinking he was going to be one of your week 1 starters, to potentially falling off the map completely and being released and let go. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but he certainly is not in a great spot there with other young ascending players on the depth chart. No real connection to Ryan Poles. He's got to make this preseason count if he's going to be a part of this Bears 53-man roster. That includes also being better against the run, because he hasn't been as strong there as you might like, and we know that's a weakness of Yannick Ngakoue as well. But I was curious whether that's overblown or whether there's some truth to that. So we went into the All-22 film, and I want to talk about some of the takeaways from that, and also what the Bears defensive coordinator said on the topic next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs makes you look good and feel good. They've got stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and the leg to give you that truly sculpted look while still looking, not formal, but, a little bit more, upscale looking fashionable. Bird Dogs do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit way better because they're not made of any of these kind of like stiff restricting cottons that you might fit from regular shorts. Like, they have this cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki. They've got other non-khaki shorts too, but it stretches to really give you that slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement, and the built-in liners are great as well. They use an anti-stink sweat-wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. I love wearing my Bird Dogs, and I think you will too. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or enter our promo code LockedOnNFL, and they're going to send you a free tech hat with any purchase. It's white, it's cool, it's comfortable, it's lightweight fabric too, and it's got a really nice style to it as well. It's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or promo code LockedOnNFL for that free white tech hat. You got to try them for yourself. Trust me, you won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. Yannick Ngakoue comes to the Chicago Bears with a reputation. We talked about it a little bit on Friday's podcast, every season of his career, minimum 8 sacks. I think his career best was 12, the year he made the Pro Bowl, but he's an 8 to 12 sack guy through and through across like 6 or 8 different seasons in the league. Like, we know what he's going to bring as a pass rusher, and he comes with a reputation of not being great in run defense. To what degree, do you want to call him a liability? Do you want to call it a weakness? However you want to designate it, I think that part is up for grabs, but it's pretty universally believed that is a weaker area of his game. He's a pass rusher first and foremost, and run defense is varying levels of successful in that process. And so I was curious a little bit about how true that is. You can look at the PFF grades, and he struggled, and I tend to, having worked for the company for a long time and knowing how their processes work, I tend to put a lot of stock into that. But I also wanted to see for myself in the All-22 film. So I did go through and break down the All-22 film, and I made a little video breaking down, first of all, some of his pass rushing, but mostly in the running game. And it's exclusively available only to members of the Locked On Bears subtext group. You go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBears, and that's going to get you access to all of our All-22 film breakdowns, including this latest one on Yannick Ngakoue, breaking down where I think the run defense deficiencies are. And I'll give you a brief overview of it here, but really you got to see the All-22 film to really get a sense of what that looks like and what you're going to then see this season on the field for the Chicago Bears. But it's $4.99 a month to join the subtext group at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBears for exclusive content separate from the podcast, breakdowns and stuff that we can't put on YouTube, exclusive data and charting on the Bears, and so much more. A direct line to me as well. You get to text me directly. I've been texting with one of our subtext subscribers here. He's been a Bears fan for 70 years out in Las Vegas. It's been fun getting to kind of know people and knowing who's a part of this podcast as well, and happy to have him along with us for the ride here. Join subtext.com/LockedOnBears to get that Yannick Ngakoue All-22 breakdown. I started to form my own opinions on his run defense, but I want to start with what the Bears defensive coordinator, Alan Williams, said, because I think he certainly came to the defense of Ngakoue in the running game. But what I think everything he said is true, but I think it's not the whole truth, is how I ultimately end up taking it away.
You paid him to get after the quarterback. How do you evaluate him as a run defender?
He'll be just fine. No, he'll be just fine. He can choke a guy out. Believe me about that. He will. He can choke a guy out, and that's our first thing, that we're going to stop the run and earn the right to rush the passer. So he'll be part of that too. The mentality of making sure that we stop the run. He'll be just fine. I've watched the tape, and he'll choke a guy out too.
Is it an overreaction then? Like, for the last couple of years, he, at least statistically, it's shown that he's struggled against the run. Is that overblown, would you say?
Yes, and yes. He'll be just fine in the run.
Is that in part because he is, as the initial, he's paid to knock the quarterback down?
I think you can do both. Some people would like to say, hey, this guy is a pass rusher, just like they say, hey, this guy's a cover corner. In the NFL, you have to do both. Your skill set may be higher one place than another, but I don't think he gets enough credit for doing what he does in the run game. If you look at the tape, he's been productive enough to win football games.
I think some or a lot of that is a coach defending his player as he should. Like, he's not going to come out and say, yeah, he's bad against the run. Like, they're never going to admit that. They're going to say that he's good and say they're not concerned. I mean, just out of, because he's one of their players. Like, you just got to back your own guy up and show that you have faith and confidence in him. That's part of the sort of public relations-y aspect of it. But I also think, he's not wrong that, yes, Ngakoue can, as he said, choke a guy out, for example. When I went through the All-22 film, again, join subtext.com/LockedOnBears to watch the actual video in the All-22 film and the drawing on the screen and breaking down the play. The problem is not his physicality, right? He's not the world's biggest, strongest defensive end, but he's got more of a speed thing off the edge. But it's not that his technique is bad necessarily and that he's not strong enough per se. He gets washed down in double teams a little too much, but everybody struggles a little bit in double teams. You'd want him to be more stout in some areas, but for the most part, to me, with Ngakoue, it tended to be a little bit more between the ears in terms of the run defense struggles of knowing his assignment, knowing his run fit, and executing it properly. Sometimes he would be too quick to maybe go inside when he needs to have contain on the outside, or one of the plays I break down is a read option play where he makes the wrong decision on there. And just, it's not always, it's just, sometimes he's going for the ball carrier and not always doing what they need him to do in terms of team run defense, as opposed to him trying to just get there and make the play. Or sometimes like he takes a poor angle on the backside of runs. Like it all tends to be stuff where it's just like, it's like decision making and assignment and mentality more than like, is he strong enough, physical enough, and technique-wise enough? Because like there are plays that are broken down in the All-22 breakdown as well. Really great leverage, gets under the guy's pads, does outside to contain, and then sheds back to the inside to try and make the play. Like he has good plays in the running game. He knows how to do it and is physically capable of doing it. It's just about doing it consistently enough and being right and correct in doing so. And I like the way that Alan Williams said, like, hey, you got to earn pass rushing here by playing in the running game. And I wonder if this coaching staff might be a little bit more firm on that with him and just a little bit like drive him to be better in run defense this season than he has been in his career. Not that he's all of a sudden going to become a dominating run defender, but maybe a little bit more consistency if the coaching staff puts the right emphasis on it for him, in addition to still getting your 8 to 12 sacks, which should make him a pretty valuable addition to this defensive line. Again, if you want to watch that All-22 film breakdown, the website, joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBears to really get a sense of this run defense for yourself. Like, I think overall, he's not going to be the guy where, you know, he just ruins the play because he's getting blown up and the linebackers can't get free because Ngakoue is the one guy who's not great and is the one guy who's causing all the problems. No. Are you going to want more from him sometimes? Yeah. Are you going to be frustrated from him sometimes in run defense? Yeah. Is that what's going to make the Bears run D bad? No. But it's not great. It's not ideal. And he'll make up for it in the pass rush. Like that's kind of the agreement. That's kind of the deal here, right? Is like, yeah, he makes up for it in the pass rush so you can live with it when maybe you're a little frustrated here or there for him in the running game. On the other side, though, the Bears' run blocking definitely got better over the weekend with the immediate follow-up of the signing of tight end Marcedes Lewis, the old dog heading into this tight end room. Big Dog, I think, is what his nickname was in Green Bay, but the old man of the tight end room. We'll learn a little bit more about what his impact could be on this Bears team with the help of a Bears player who's spent a lot of time with him in Green Bay. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And we all know football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get the bonus bets for every victory they have. You can take those bonus bets, that free money, right back to you, and use that on the spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. You can start to put that on how the Bears are going to do in each of their games. You can bet on Justin Fields' MVP odds, Matt Eberflus' Coach of the Year odds, and so much more, all with America's #1 sportsbook that's fast, easy to use. The app is safe, secure, and you can get your monies paid to you instantly. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOnNFL. FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Normally, we wouldn't do a whole segment of the podcast on the Chicago Bears signing a #3 tight end, because that's really what Marcedes Lewis comes in here as. But given his age, his prominence, and just like his consistency, like I think there's a little bit something more here to Marcedes Lewis. I think he's going to ultimately prove to be particularly valuable and is going to play more than a typical #3 tight end might. You know, certainly more than we saw #3 tight ends play in this offense last year, because they didn't really have much for #3 tight end. They barely had much for #2 tight end. But like last year with the Green Bay Packers, and really the last 5 years in Green Bay, he's been in the 400 to 500 snaps range. You know, 450, 475, 420, 480. You know, like in that sort of range, he's been a guy they've been able to rely on as like more like a #2 tight end. And given the Bears have Kmet and Tanyan, like of course Lewis becomes #3. But like if it isn't obvious and clear, like he is a blocking tight end through and through. You know, last season he played all 17 games. I think he was considered a 17-game starter for them. He caught 6 passes for 66 yards. Like he is not as much of a receiving threat at this stage of the game. He's just enough of a receiving threat that you got to cover him. Like he's not a 6th offensive lineman where you just say like Bradley Sewell. There's a name from the past. Sowell, Sowell. Bradley Sowell. Was it Sewell or Sowell? From a couple of years ago when they'd play him as a 6th offensive lineman /tight end. Like but like he was never really going to run a route and catch a pass, so you knew he was a blocker and you didn't have to cover him. Like Marcedes Lewis is still going to run routes and does run routes, but he's 39 years old. He's not outrunning linebackers and safeties too much anymore. He'll be the check down option, and he'll catch it, and he's not going to drop it. Not going to make a bunch of guys miss afterwards, but mostly he's a really strong pass protector and a really strong run blocker. And even beyond like the actual on-field blocking, he's a veteran who's been in the league for this will be his 18th season. He has seen so much more than any other player on the team, clearly the oldest player on the roster now, the most experienced player on the roster, and spent 5 years in Green Bay, 4 of those with Luke Getsy in this offensive system. So he comes in and instantly knows it, to the point where Getsy was recruiting him to Chicago, as was Robert Tonyan, the other tight end who came over from the Green Bay Packers. And I thought Tonyan did a really good job of explaining Lewis's value to the team, even beyond just his on-field blocking.
What does Marcedes bring to an offense that maybe we don't recognize? Because, we see the run blocking and things like that, but
Yeah.
but what does he bring that, fans or outsiders don't notice?
Yeah, I think he just brings an attitude. Yes, he's like a run blocker, but the presence, obviously you see him walk into a building, you can feel his presence. But just that vocal leadership, like this is a young team, and 18 years, this dude's been in the NFL almost half of his life. So he's seen about every single game, every single look, every single team, every single coordinator. So just bringing in a guy who's used to the system. We were together for 5 years. So just bringing in someone who has obviously done it at a high level over and over again, and then just the leadership aspect for sure.
The signing of Marcedes Lewis in particular, to me, is the clearest signal yet, and I think Ngakoue is part of this too, of the Bears' direction and sort of like taking the next step and how they're trying to go after this team, right? Like you sign a 39-year-old tight end to a 1-year deal because to help you win more games this season, right? This is not a long-term move. Neither is Ngakoue on a 1-year deal, although he could be has a good year this year, contract extension, he could be a long-term move, but Marcedes Lewis is not. This will probably be his last season in the NFL. Statistically, it's not expected to go much longer than this. And this is the Bears saying like, all right, let's get some veterans in here. Let's get this team better and let's win some games. Like player development was first and foremost last season. I don't think it's first and foremost this season. I think winning games is first and foremost this season, and player development is second. And that means having Lewis in there over other younger tight ends who could take that playing time and get better and maybe grow into a bigger role in this team. Well, no. Let's get the guy out there who's going to be a helpful blocker and make this offense better and help us win more games, because that's ultimately what this is really about. Like this is part of that transition from, tanking and adding talent to rebuilding to like actually trying to take this rebuild into wins and turn the corner and start to have some upward mobility and ascension in that way. So I think there's a lot of value there. I also think Marcedes Lewis could end up being best friends with Darnell Wright. If your right tackle as a rookie, he's a little bit raw, needs to change some things technique-wise, might be some ups and downs there. Marcedes Lewis is that pass blocker that you put next to him to help him out, chip, stay in pass protection, double teams over there. Like that feels like some Darnell Wright insurance to help out on that side. Or if Braxton Jones, for whatever reason, struggles, right, he can be a guy that helps out your offensive tackles significantly and helps out Justin Fields in that way as well, in addition to helping out Khalil Herbert and Dante Foreman and Roshan Johnson and all the running backs with what Lewis can do in the ground game. He's not going to be an every down player. He's a number 3 tight end. Is he going to be the difference between wins and losses? Probably not. But is he going to make an impact on this team? You can bet he will. And especially if you end up having an injury at tight end for whatever reason, like he can step into a bigger role if you need him to. And I just think like it's a smart move. Packers fans were mad to see him come to Green Bay. Like that's always a good sign too. And I think he's a great locker room person as well, as we just heard Robert Tonyan talking about. So great signing of Marcedes Lewis. Excited to see what he's able to do on this Bears team. And he's fun to watch too when you watch him block. So I think he's just going to be a real veteran leader for that group and for that offense as a whole that everyone can kind of lean on a little bit. And I think that'll go a long way for this team. Be curious what you think of Marcedes Lewis, what you think of Ngakoue, as we've been talking about those two on the podcast lately. Leave a comment here on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. You can tweet us at Locked On Bears. You can post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group, or you can text me directly in our subtext group. It gives you a number. It's a text-based system. You text me, it goes right to me. I can respond to you directly. We have one-on-one conversations. Join subtext.com/LockedOnBears. However you join the conversation, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we love our everydayers that are tuning in 5 days a week to get your Bears fix. We're finally going to talk to Robert Schmitz from the Bears blog here this week and kind of check in on the state of Bears media and have an interesting conversation on like negativity and criticism and objectivity and what's good and what's not as good in the Bears media. It's a lot of fun. The Ngakoue news kind of pushed that back for us, but we recorded the conversation and want to get to you on the podcast here soon. So that'll be coming later this week. You got to come back for that. And of course, you always have to come back for your next opportunity to bear down.